The second positive piece of feedback I want to offer is that the depiction of Alzheimer's and dementia has also been extraordinarily well done. The extent to which I have been invested in the story hangs heavily on this aspect. My grandmother began to experience symptoms of dementia in 2015, but we were fortunate that her decline was slow. However, around the time the show kicked off the Mike storyline, my grandmother began to rapidly lose her memory. In January, she still mostly knew me, but by April, that was no longer true. On March 31st, 2018, the show celebrated its 55th anniversary by trying to recreate Luke's and give Mike a night of memories. I actually wrote a version of the story that I'm going to link below in case you're interested, drawing on my own experiences with my grandmother, particularly the guilt and worry that my family and I felt, and the way that conversations with my grandmother would dip in and out of time and lucidity. There were times where we would be sitting in her kitchen, and within a couple of minutes, she would refer to me as being 8 years old, watching Nickelodeon, thinking that that's who I was at that moment, if I were in high school, and then in my 20s, and then in my 30s. She would go between all those versions of me without even blinking. It was discombobulating to see and experience, and it's something that I wanted to try and represent on page. That was actually the last time I wrote anything about Mike's story in my own fan fiction. Because as I stated, I wrote that aired on March 31st. I wrote it that same day. And then my grandmother passed away on April 21st, 3 weeks later. Watching the story became so much more difficult after that. There was a scene later that August when Mike told Sonny he wishes he was better off dead. And that really hit me hard. Because I had literally had that conversation with my grandmother. And she had said those exact words. And it was just jarring and incredibly upsetting. And I almost couldn't breathe. I had to stop watching the show for just a minute. And I had to take it in. I remember later, actually, I tweeted at Maurice saying, like, this was such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful episode. And he replied with a like, because it reminded me of my grandmother. So I just want to... One of the things I have really, really appreciated is the care that they have taken with what Mike is going through. Because showing that frustration of what it's like for the person suffering it is something that I don't often see in these stories. It's usually about the family, but here they really took a minute to give Mike the space. There were moments when my grandmother was lucid enough to know that whatever she couldn't remember was something that she should know, and she would get so frustrated. And we tried everything, and it was so upsetting for her to know that in a couple of minutes she would not be there again, and she would forget, and she got impatient with my uncle, who was always correcting her because he couldn't quite truly accept the reality of the situation. And I would try to like go with it, and I did the research, and I tried to tell everybody else the research, but I'm in my 30s, but to the adults in the house, I'm always going to be the kid. And I'm sorry if this part feels a little... I didn't write a script for this section because I definitely wanted this to feel a little bit more, obviously, more real. That scene... I'm going to say later something about how I'm not going to remember the story in 5 years, and that's a spoiler. But this scene I will remember for the rest of my life, because I have never in my life watched anything where I had to stop and just take a minute because it felt so real that I couldn't breathe. I'm sorry. I think it's important for me to really state how much I want this story to succeed and how much this part of it has meant the world to me, because what we went through and what we went through, what my grandmother went through, what I go through every day not having her, and not only not having her, but having those final months stolen from me. If you're lucky in life, you have one person that believes in you no matter what, 100%. They're always on board for whatever crazy thing you're going to do, and that was my grandmother. No, I could have told her I was running for president, and she would have said, okay, so how do we make that happen? Like, she just was always on board for everything, and that's the horror of what Alzheimer's and dementia and these kind of diseases they do when they steal the person and they're just there, but they're not there anymore. And the last time I was ever with my grandmother, she didn't know me. And I always kind of had this thought in the back of my head that she would be the last one. That I might be the last person she knew because of how much she meant to me. I thought I was special somehow, and I wasn't, and that was so hard. I think it's important for me to take this time to compliment this show because I have often been accused of being very, very snarky and very, very dismissive and very, very cranky. And this is why I love General Hospital, because this genre, this show does this, where it brings, it's been 2.5 years since I lost her, and just, I can still bring it back to myself. I can still remember it. Sorry, let me look at my script and see where I am. Like I said, I didn't script the part where I would talk about my grandmother because every time I practiced it, I kind of did something different with it, and I wanted it to feel natural. I didn't want to prepare it. I want anybody watching this to see what this story means to me, what I wanted it to mean. And I also want to say how difficult I am making this, not having watched what I think are Mike's final episodes. And it's not, I've been snarky about it, like, oh, I don't want to watch General Hospital because I'm just like, I don't have time for that. I'm just like, I don't know if I'm ready emotionally to watch Mike die. I don't know. I really saw my grandmother in Mike's character, especially in that scene, and I saw myself in Sonny. And that is probably the first and only time I am ever going to identify with Sonny frickin' Corinthos as a character. So, well done. The depiction of this disease, the stress it puts on family, and the person suffering. This has been first-class work. And it gives me hope that someone on the writing staff really cares. When you care about the source material the way that somebody on that staff clearly does, you can do such good work. Ultimately, because this part of the story has been so well done, it makes my overall disappointment all the more upsetting. It's the fact that I can't enjoy this story, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It breaks my heart in a way that I'm not sure I really confronted until I sat down to really think about why pieces of this story affect me the way that you've just seen, and why overall it's lost its impact. Why I think that in the moment I'm gonna be upset when I watch, but I don't know yet how much it's gonna stay with me.